Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. Over the years, there have been a number of post-apocalyptic films.
Mad Max.
The Hunger Games.
Elysium.
The Matrix. And what these films have done is they have primed us to believe that a post-apocalyptic world has happened and is a future possibility.
My favourite documentary is called Bronze Age Apocalypse, and it's talking about the Bronze Age collapse and the subsequent Dark Age. I'm using quotation marks there, you can't see them. And it turns out that it wasn't really an apocalypse.
It's not an apocalypse like we've been led to believe as far as Hollywood has shown us, where it's often very dystopian. And one of the things, actually, a lot of them stem from what you might call young adult literature.
Yes.
So they are telling us these stories at a very impressionable age. And one of the things it does is it goes into along with all the other things that we're learning in our education, the historical facts and the mathematical facts and the reality stuff that we are learning, it goes into our psyche on a level that we don't realize where it came from. And then we start to believe that the apocalypse is a reality.
That it has happened before and it will happen again.
Yes.
Whereas the reality is, take the Bronze Age collapse, it was very different. What actually happened was the dominant palace system that needed to be big and expansive and powerful in order to acquire all the raw materials to make bronze, and then to make bronze and to make it into weapons of war, all of a sudden became obsolete because
a new technology
came along, the blast furnace, which meant that things could be heated to a higher temperature, which means all of a sudden iron can be smelted.
And when you have iron, nobody wants to use bronze.
You don't need the big trade networks. Local rulers can make their own iron locally, and it simplifies the whole system.
It also is an interesting thing because the development of a new technology did not mean a bigger and more top-heavy system was necessary.
No, it actually ended up simplifying the system.
And the other thing that I find interesting is when we talk about the Bronze Age collapse as a big civilizational collapse, with that you would expect a loss of knowledge.
And it didn't really happen.
You didn't get a loss of knowledge. We still know how to make bronze. We've never lost that knowledge, but we got a different and new knowledge. And also we didn't need the elite ruling bureaucracy that was previously there maintaining these trade networks in order to get all the ingredients.
And in actual fact, it all depends on how people interpret the archaeological evidence, but one of the telltale signs that it was not a society-wide collapse was what happened to the cities in ancient Israel. And what you see in the archaeological evidence there is that the palaces are burnt, but the city is not. And what that tells you is that it was the elites, that it might have been the end of the world for them, but it wasn't for your average person on the street.
And when we say end of the world, what we're actually talking about is the end of a way of life.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that the civilization itself has imploded. It doesn't mean that the society and the culture and the technology has suddenly caved in and catastrophically ended. What it means is that the ruling classes had a change.
Yes.
And a change in how it was done, and a change over in the people who were administrating the society.
Well, one of the key things one of the interesting facts about the Bronze Age collapse is that it was in that period that we call the Bronze Age Dark Age that was the Iliad. The Iliad came from that dark age. One of the great tomes of Western literature was developed in that time. There are parallels to that, to the medieval dark age that we're all taught about. And what is from an English-speaking point of view, what is one of the great tomes from that period? It's Beowulf, one of the most famous epic poems.
Well, just to jump forward to the more recent quote-unquote dark age, during that time, many of the most beautiful cathedrals throughout Europe were built with fantastic stained glass windows and carving and architecture and engineering, really, because they were building very big, heavy structures, and how they structurally engineered those is quite an interesting subject in and of itself. But also, we're looking there at the end of what you might call the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, and that might be a very catastrophic event for other countries in the empire, not only for Rome being sacked by the Vandals, but other countries in the empire. And when you actually look, what you find is that for several hundred years after the Eagles left Britain, after Rome withdrew its troops and left Britain to fend for itself, shall we say, they were using Roman coins and Roman infrastructure
Yes.
for centuries after that. And that really, I think, is another thing that is evidence of how the monetary system is about the people using it, not about the administration.
This might sound like I'm going on a massive tangent, but it's actually relevant to what you just said there about the monetary economy. There is a very strong argument to say from a lot of the sort of the dissident financial commentators online that argue that the official cash rate doesn't actually control interest rates. That what the reserve banks around the world, or the Federal Reserve or Bank of England or whoever, what they're actually doing is following what the markets are already doing. So we have this illusion that the central banks are controlling inflation via interest rates, whereas really it's the other way round. The market is reacting to inflation signals, and the Reserve Bank or the Fed is then reacting to the interest rates that the market is already showing. In this example, the market that is setting the interest rates is the people, and that the central banks are copying the market, not setting the market. So it's a bit of a mind trick.
Well, this reminds me of a quote from Peter Drucker. He said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And I think this is what's going on with the elites, the ruling classes, the establishment, the weffers, whatever you want to call them, that they are afraid of losing their power, and therefore they are trying to manipulate behaviour in the populace to create the future that they want to see. And this is epitomised with the New World Order idea. The definition of New World Order is a globalist elite working to institute a one world government. And that is them trying to institute the future that they want to see, something that works for them. But the problem is that actually they're afraid of the New World Order, because the way of things is that a New World Order will not include them. This demonstrates why we don't need to be afraid. The future happens organically. That when people try to create a future from the top down, it doesn't work out how they plan, and it doesn't ever work out in their benefit. How the future unfolds is to do with how the people in it behave, and it's impossible for any one group to control the majority.
It's too complex a situation. They're trying to cheat fate, and they can't do it.
They're trying to avoid the consequences of their actions.
Yes, precisely.
And we've talked before about change, and change happening incrementally and us actually being all right with change. It's one of the reasons why keeping a personal diary can be so helpful, is because when we look back, we see how much we have changed, how much our lives have changed, and that we're okay with the change. And that is a very reassuring thing for us as human beings who are often uncomfortable with the idea of a big change all of a sudden. But life does change and things move on, and that the change that's coming with a new world order or what people might say the civilizational collapse is coming, is not going to be one that creates this post-apocalyptic world that Hollywood has primed us to expect.
Yeah, the establishment want us to believe that. An analogy that I would draw here is that the WEFers, the establishment, view us as cattle and themselves as the herdsman. And how do you move a herd of cattle around? Well, you jump up and down and you wave your arms, and if you've got a great big stick, you can whack it on something and make a big noise. You're effectively trying to frighten the cattle into going in a particular direction. So this is what they're doing. They are deliberately trying to frighten people. So one of the key things is simply to say no. Like Neo in the Matrix, when he's being shot, just say, no, I'm not going to be afraid.
Yes.
Or even if you are afraid, I'm going to have courage and I'm going to not allow the fear to control me.
Yes, and to take root. And the thing is that if we are mentally independent and not acting like baby birds waiting for the next thing from the establishment, they have less control and less power.
Yes.
And we will be less impacted when the change of government happens.
And a lot of that independence is not necessarily independence in physical terms. A lot of it is it's
all mental.
Mental resilience, mental independence, that you simply don't have to play their games.
One other observation is that every so often there is a sudden change. You might call it a punctuated history. We've observed this in the past 20 years with the huge changes we've experienced as a society with the introduction of social media and smartphones. And if we just look back 20 years and see how our lives have changed in that time, it's a huge difference today. So when we have lived through a period of rapid change, to have somebody say to us, oh, well, we're going to have, big changes are coming, it can be quite a scary thought, because
what have we just been having?
If that wasn't change, what's coming down the line?
Yes.
But we have lived through a period of rapid change, and it's actually only when we look back that we realise it.
Yes.
It's something that we see in hindsight rather than what we experience in the day-to-day. I'm reminded of a story. I read this article by a man who moved back to his home in Sri Lanka, and there was what you might call a societal collapse going on at the time. And he wrote this article saying, what does it mean to live through a societal collapse? What is it like? And what does it look like? What does it mean? How does it feel? And he said, life just continues as normal, but it's punctuated with dramatic events every now and then.
Yes.
And this is what we've talked about with the Bronze Age collapse or the end of the Western Roman Empire. These administrative systems break down, but it doesn't create the post-apocalyptic world that you see in Hollywood movies. What it is life continuing as normal.
Yes.
With these dramatic events happening every now and then.
Yes.
And people getting on and living through it. And when they come out the other side, life has changed.
Yes.
But they're okay. They've changed with it. And there's a continuity there that is much more reassuring than thinking everybody's got to live in these 12 districts and you're only allowed to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, and I like to focus on the fact that all the noises that the legacy media, the establishment make are mind games to try and distract and freak you out. And
also part of it is projection. They're afraid.
And they are projecting.
And
the iron law of projection, actually.
It's a bit like them, if everybody else is panicking, they feel better.
In conclusion, is it just a case of don't be afraid, or is it a case of it's okay to recognise the fear, but have courage?
I think everybody's going to have feelings of, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? Because it's human nature and we don't know what's going to happen, and that's always a little bit scary. But I think don't let those feelings of fear take root. Yes. And also know where you stand and that life is going to go on.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.